It's Tuesday, Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 97, Bom Dia. And that's probably the extent of my Portuguese. Anyway, we are talking about Brazil today. We've spoken a couple of countries here along the way, but today we're going to focus on Brazil with a very special guest who really should need no introduction to the land of interculturalism, but we're going to introduce her anyway, and we'll be back in just a moment. See you then. Do you like a good steakhouse, man?
I do, but I think I was corrected in the green room that at this point of day, it's not Bom Dia anymore. It's Boa Tarde.
Yeah, Bom Dia.
It's past the lunch hour, even though I didn't have a good Brazilian lunch yet. And you know what I'm craving? One of the best pieces of accoutrements that you get in the Brazilian steakhouse is those little bread balls, the pão de queijo.
Oh my God,
the cheese bread. Oh man, I could have some of those right now.
But let's bring in our special guest. Please welcome to the broadcast, Jacqueline. Now we're going to try and get this. Jacqueline Fonseca de Abreu. Is it?
Yes. That was perfect.
Look at that! Look at that! How good's that?
Look at you!
Welcome,
That was perfect. Perfect pronunciation, guys.
Oh well, there you go. We have a bit of we do nothing else but learn pronunciation. That's all we do in our spare time, and it's only when we go live so we can impress everybody that we're talking to. That's the only reason we do it.
Yeah, so it looks like we know something. Yeah, I should have looked it up. I should have looked it up. What means welcome? Is it bem-vindo, or how do you say welcome?
Bem-vindo. And in the plural, it's say bem-vindos.
Bem-vindos. All right. See,
okay.
We're learning.
Well, welcome. As I said, we're going to talk about Brazil, and it's always great. Now, I want to just give people a heads up. I've worked with Jackie so much that, and I'm going to repeat what I said in the green room. Jackie is the gold standard when it comes to a person who knows about, obviously she's from Brazil, you would expect this, but when it comes to passing all that information to clients that are going to Brazil, going to do work there, do business with Brazil, there is nobody better on the planet, as far as I'm concerned, my humble opinion, than Jacqueline. So welcome, Jacqueline. We're going to talk about Brazil, just, a few little bits and pieces about Brazil. First, I want to address the misconception, preconceptions, because we always talk about that when it comes to Brazil. Of course, Brazilians do nothing else but watch Formula One. Well, of course, the great Ayrton Senna. I have to mention him. Watch that and football, and in between sessions of playing beach volleyball in their bikinis. That's right, isn't it?
Yes. Like I am.
And of course, everything with a glass of caipirinha in hand, right?
Caipirinha, yeah.
And then you have caipirinha, of course. Then it adds like more happiness to the vibe,
Of course.
That's kind of it. Yeah.
But as that is being facetious, of course, because what is always surprising for people that are going there, depending on, of course, what part of the country they're going to, this can be the absolute. Maybe opposite. Maybe some of it's true, as all stereotypes. So please, let us into the window of Brazil. What are some of the main misconceptions that people miss when they're preparing to go to Brazil or do business there?
I think one key misconception is that we are. I think the label of third culture country or third culture place. So I think that's a very, very complicated one. And even when I go to the US, it's funny because we have a very advanced banking system in Brazil, and that was like 18 years ago. So I went to the bank here, and I'm in the ATM machine in the bank trying to print a checkbook, because that's the way we used to do in Brazil. We want a check, and then you press like, okay, option, checkbook, how many pages, and then you print, and then you get out of the bank with the checkbook in your hand. And it's funny because then I had talked to a banker before, opened my bank and whatever, my bank account, and she was like, don't you have a machine like this in your country? Because I had mentioned I was from Brazil. I said, yeah, and I'm trying to figure out how to print a check. And she laughed so much, said, no, you don't have a machine like that. I said, no, I have a better one. It's like I can do everything literally from that machine. But that's the thing. It was this assumption, like, well, you came from a third world country and you don't have that type of technology. And instead of comparing, well, originally I came to Moline, which is a small city in Illinois, and I said, why wouldn't you compare Moline to Rio de Janeiro, or not even compare, just not assume. So I think there are lots of assumptions, and some of the things that people just generalize that makes me so mad about corruption. So they just assume that everybody's corrupt, or they're late. So I schedule business meetings, and then my client arrives like 20 or 30 minutes late, and I go like, why are you late? Well, because you're Brazilian, and I've learned that they're always late. It was like, not me. So, and so there's so many things, but I think those things, they enter a lot negatively in the way of doing business with Brazilians, because people go defensively already, kind of picking the negative labels instead of the positive. There's so many.
And some of the labels or some of those negative stereotypes that you mentioned, to me, they sounded quite North American, because growing up in Europe, our stereotypes of Brazil or South America in general were a little bit different. So for me, growing up in Germany, I never looked at Brazil as a third world country. I looked at it as this country of, well, that's where the best soccer players are from, and these are the guys that we need to beat to become champions, right? And also, I grew up in the 80s watching, well, back to the stereotype, watching soccer in Formula One, and as a German, those of you who follow the sports of football and soccer, there have been some great German teams and individuals in that sport, but also some great Brazilians. There's always been this rivalry between almost equally good competitors, and also this admiration, especially when it comes to the effortlessness and elegance that somehow surrounds everything Brazil. To me, at least, my positive stereotype of Brazil, they all look so easy, so effortless, like a dance. Why is it that we always look like robots and Brazilians look like ballerinas? What is wrong with us? That's my positive stereotype.
That's not your lack of dancing skills, is it, mate?
That's kind of like some samba classes then, Christian. Yeah. I think I'm really glad you're bringing this point. I think, and that's one thing that I always talk to my clients. It's always going to depend on the lenses where we look through, like from the angle. Of course, like in Brazil, when we think about Germans, we think a lot about soccer too. Well, maybe I'm not going to mention what happened when we
No, we're not talking about that.
Germany, like our association, like no, we're not going to go there.
Fight!
No.
That's the only reason I brought you on, Jackie. I wanted to see.
Like no, we don't. But that's one interesting thing. I think it depends a lot on the way people interact, or their experiences, or the way it's portrayed in your own country or your own culture, or sometimes an experience you've had. And it's funny, I went here to a presentation about Brazil that was done by a lady who has been to a small place in Brazil once, and then she wanted to talk about the Brazilian culture, and I go like, hey, let me go. And it's funny, so this lady said, in Brazil, they get paper napkins and put a toothpick on, like they make a hole, and then you're going to find it on the table. I was laughing. I was like, where did this lady go to? Saying that this is a cultural Brazilian thing. I've never seen this, and I've traveled. And And then in the end, I was like, I'm not going to interrupt her and say anything. I'm not going to be rude. But I went to her and said, okay, what are the places in Brazil you've been to? And she said Horizontino, which is a small, tiny place in the south. And I was like, so tell me about the napkin. And I was like, yeah, I went to this place and that's the way Brazilians do it. And I said, no, that's the way that restaurant did.
Yeah.
And probably it was outside and then they didn't want the napkin to fly away. You know, it was like some creative strategy someone used.
It's funny how people make their one singular experience about an entire group of people, in this case 200 million Brazilians, right?
Exactly. And I think it's important, and I'm always careful when I'm working with Brad, for example, and we are working with people relocating. I'm always very careful about asking where state and city you're coming from and where state and city you're going to, because it's so diverse and different. But
so you are from Rio. So you're a special kind of Brazilian because you're from Rio de Janeiro. So what makes people from Rio different than from Sao Paulo, from Salvador de Bahia, from Porto Alegre?
Okay, so one thing that comes to my mind right away is, and some of the things would be match some of the stereotypical views people have. So one is the beach. Like you have beaches all over. The beaches are amazing, and then that's one thing that's part of our culture because we just do things around it. It's like we go and walk at the beach, or I would get my laptop and work at the beach, and we combine fun and work, you know, as much as we can. So that's one thing that's a huge part of who we are. The other thing in Rio that I think it's funny when they mention Sao Paulo, because this thing about working at the beach, people from Sao Paulo, they just go like, you know, you guys are not serious because you're like playing all the time. And I go like, well, we are working. We are just at the beach. And sometimes I would send them pictures. Hi, I'm here with my laptop and producing. I'm translating here while you're translating inside of your office. So it's just like, it's still work, you know? So that's one thing that's very typical from people from Rio. There is something about being active. And that's one thing mostly, I think also, again, because of the beach area, there's one thing you're wearing bikini all the time or whatever. So there's something that I see more in Brazil about the way you look. And it's not only about looks, it's about being healthy and, you know, trying to have an active lifestyle. So that's very common there. Soccer, of course, we have, you know, that's huge in Brazil because we have Maracanã, the big stadium, and it's funny because when I am Fluminense, but I wanted to see a Fla-Flu that's Fluminense Flamengo, and I went to Maracanã, but Flamengo's group, like their team, it's like the people who cheer from the Flamengo, they are more vibrant, and I hate to say that, but that's true. So I was cheering for them to score a goal so I could see that, whoa, you know, from the stadium. Yeah. And my cousin's like, Jackie, come on, shut up. You should go to the other side. But there's no other.
That's heresy, Jackie. That is, you betrayed your own team.
Betrayed my own team just to see that vibe, you know, that's very cool. So that's one thing that is very common around our culture too. They are
for those of you who are watching this and you're probably in North America and you have no idea what the last 90 seconds were about, Fluminense and Flamengo are two of the big soccer teams from Rio de Janeiro, and Maracanã is the biggest stadium in the world. This is where, if you're a professional soccer player, if you want to win big, you want to win in that stadium, and not a lot of teams have had the pleasure, honor, or success to do so. So if you're in North America and you don't care about soccer, you might as well switch to another program for the next couple of minutes, because let's just face it, this is the beautiful game. So I'm sorry, in your cricket, I'm sure that's beautiful too. But for now, it's going to be football.
Thanks for the clarification. Yeah, well, let's just, there is one thing about us, is the thing about having fun. We want to have fun. That's why, like, when we have Carnival, for example, which is like our biggest celebration, and we literally party for 4 days nonstop. And And that's the thing. There is one thing about, it's funny. My mom goes like, "Oh, Jackie, take a look. Just, invited your aunt over. We're going to have like some beer here." And I'm like making some barbecue. And it's like, yeah, have fun, And that's one thing that I think for me, for example, coming to the US, it was very different to see that people, either they wait until they retire to do the things they love,
Right.
or they work, they hate the jobs they work from 9 to 5, and then after 5 they do something they hate more, like mow the grass or something like this. or they wait to mow the grass on the weekend to complain that they are busy on the weekend. And I was like, people, just hire someone to do it. But there is a cultural thing about I can do by myself, which is amazing in so many aspects. But for me, it's very complicated to understand, okay, when do people have fun? And that's one thing that's very important in our culture in general. But it feel a lot.
I do want to bring up something that Brazil and the United States have in common. However, it plays out differently, I think. And you tell me if I'm onto something or not. Both countries are shaped and formed by immigrants who came to make it a country. And both countries are founded on land that once belonged to the native population, so that was taken away from the natives. And both countries have had immigration from many different corners of the world. However, the multicultural nature of Brazil seems to show up differently than here in the US. I don't hear Brazilians talking about, well, I'm Italian Brazilian, I'm Portuguese Brazilian, I'm German Brazilian, Japanese Brazilian. Does that matter less in Brazil than it does here in the United States?
I think the way we formed our culture was very different from the beginning, because we mixed way more than here. So, for example, I got married to this person from Pennsylvania, a white guy, and then when people would look at us, it was like they would call us a biracial couple, and because I'm dark. Or it's funny, sometimes when I would arrive at a place, and then he would come later or something, and people would look at someone who would look like me and say, "Oh, is that your husband, Jackie?" I was like, "No, my husband doesn't look anything like me." Because in the US, you kind of expect the couples to look like each other still, even with all the diversity. You have those blocks separated. You have the neighborhood that's here in my area, for example, I can drive and I go like, this is the African-American neighborhood, this is the Latino neighborhood, and this is the white neighborhood. We can see it very clearly. In Brazil, it's all mixed. So, and then I think not identifying like I am Brazilian Japanese, for example, because you don't even know when you don't know. For example, in my case, I know about some origins, but some of them I don't have a clue. Like my grandmother, she was born in the north of Brazil, and her mother died when she was born. So right there, we don't know a lot, So, and then she moved to Rio to live with her cousins and her aunts and uncles. And then it's interesting. So she married my grandfather, whose mother was super white with blue eyes. And then because of our names, we know we have a lot of Portuguese influence and Spanish. And in my father's side, his father was black, very dark skinned. But they don't know where they came from, So it's so complicated because then they all mixed. So if you look at my family, it's black, white, my color, whatever. I have like curly hair, straight hair in one head.
Yeah. But this confirms what I heard from other Brazilians. So does this mean that there is less division in the country about origins of certain parts of the population? You all feel as Brazilian no matter what?
Yeah. We don't label ourselves whatever Brazilian. We label ourselves Brazilians. And even my daughter, for example, she was born here, but she's my daughter. And then, she says when she's there, I'm Brazilian. And then they go like, you're American, you're not born here. In our mind, it's very interesting when people here say, I am Colombian. And I said, oh, where from Colombia are you from? My mother was from whatever. And I said, okay, so where did you live? And they go like, I've never lived there. I've never been to Colombia. Well, you've never been to Colombia, you say you're Colombian. And I understand that because of the way people name themselves because of, knowing or the ancestors. But I think what you're mentioning about the division, I thought it was very strange when I came Christian because I thought it was so divided. I think there is beauty in knowing and learning about all those things. But at the same time, there is a division that people wouldn't embrace inclusion because of that.
Nice. Brett, you have a question bubbling before I go to a question from the audience.
Oh, no. Let's get the question from the audience. What do we got here?
Christina from Italy is asking, and I have an answer to that, but I want to hear your answer first, Jacqueline. How is the Portuguese spoken in Brazilian muito diferente from the Portuguese that is spoken in Portugal?
Yes, it's different. The accent's different. There are some words that are different, but you can communicate perfectly. It's kind of like British English and American English. And it's very interesting. I went to a conference in Portugal when my daughter was 2, and her first language was, and she was born here, so her first language was Portuguese because I've always talked to her in Portuguese. And she started saying, Mama, carinha, carinha, carinha. I had no idea what carinha was. And I was like, what is carinha? So I asked someone in the hotel, and then the person in the front desk, and she said, oh, that's what you call school bus. And I had no idea. We don't say this in Portuguese.
So there are certain words that just are different in pronunciation.
Yeah, kind of like British English and American English.
I have a friend who's from Porto in Portugal, and she always says, Portuguese in Portugal sounds like the music fado, always kind of melancholy and a little bit sad. And Portuguese from Brazil sounds like bossa nova. For her, Brazilian Portuguese is like European Portuguese with sugar sprinkled on top.
Oh,
that's what she said it.
Yeah, well, there is a melody when we are speaking Portuguese. It's interesting if I just close my eyes and listen. It's and our intonations are all over. And even when we ask a simple question, like if my mom today said, I called her when I was walking, and just by saying, I'm very glad you called me, it's like, for example, oh, filha, tô tão feliz que você ligou. It's like, ta, 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 ta. And I go like, this is so, and that's kind of the way we talk. There is a sound, a song. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. Well, one of the many things we touch on when people are preparing, and obviously, as I said, I always bring Jackie in as a country specialist. And now the interculturalists that are watching this, whether it be now or on replay, know what we're talking about. But those people that are in the business world, we obviously, when we're doing training, we like to bring people in that perhaps have some specific knowledge, especially if it's something that's regional about Brazil. So regionality in Brazil, you mentioned Sao Paulo, Rio, northern parts of Brazil. I think let's concentrate on the south a little bit, because obviously Sao Paulo is a large center. You mentioned a lot of business there. We've trained a lot of people that have gone there. What is something specific about that area there that you could point people to be aware of when they go?
Yeah, well, I think if you think about Sao Paulo, it's usually like this big business center. Like if you think Brazil, Sao Paulo, you associate immediately with business and flights leaving Sao Paulo to everywhere in the world you can possibly think of. Straight flight, Rio, Sao Paulo all the time. So that's just like something many people live in Rio, work in Sao Paulo, or vice versa. Usually like they go and do business and come back. It's very, very interesting, the whole dynamics. The cultural life in Sao Paulo is unbelievably nice. It's something that last year, for example, I was doing a training in Sao Paulo, and after work, my calendar was just booked with things that I wanted to do because there's just so much. It's amazing restaurants for anywhere you can possibly think of. Theater, music, everything. It's just like, and museums, galleries. It's just, and it's nonstop. So it's nonstop. It's literally very dynamic and, but also stressful in the sense when people come from another place and go like, whoa, it's, I have some friends that they go like, oh my gosh, it feels like you go with the crowd, if you're on the streets, and you better go with the crowd because if you try to come the opposite way, it's kind of hard if you're coming from a smaller place, but it's very vibrant and active.
And what affected the immigration, the historical, as Christian mentioned before, great influence of cultures that have come in to build up the Brazilian identity there. Specific cultures that show up in Sao Paulo, especially from a both business and social sense, I guess. Talking about the Japanese, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing. It's very diverse, but then you had an influx of Japanese immigrants for such a long time, and it's interesting because there are some times that you're around people, and I have friends from Japanese descent, and it's interesting. And again, they don't say I'm Japanese Brazilian; they just say I'm Brazilian. Right. But sometimes I had a client that he goes like, check, that was very weird. I arrived at the airport, and when I looked around, I felt like, oh, there are many people coming from Japanese, and suddenly they're all speaking Portuguese. I was like, he goes like, yeah, you mentioned about this. And he goes like, and you go to a Japanese restaurant and you feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm in Japan. Well, of course, they are made by real Japanese folks, It's specifically one area. And that's one thing that's interesting. You mentioned about Sao Paulo, but so that's the Japanese culture in that area. But if you think about Bahia, that's the Northeast, that's where we had more African descendants from all over. Because in that area, in Bahia, that was a part of slavery. And then lots of the slaves that were not sold, they were kept and they stayed there. So then you have like a huge, and it's interesting because when people ask where exactly did they come from, they don't know because they came from different parts from Africa, to that region. So, and it's very interesting. Some of my clients, they said, Jack, now I look at pictures of African descendants from Mozambique or other places, and I go like, oh my gosh, it looks so much like my grandmother or my mother, and because of all those features. But that's so unique, so cool.
That's also the reason why Brazilian cuisine is so multifaceted, right? There are so many different immigration waves that brought in their style of cooking, especially in Bahia or Recife, in the northern and eastern parts of Brazil, you find a lot of these West African styles, right? And I've heard of pockets in the very south of Brazil, Blumenau, and further south towards the border to Uruguay, where you have German pockets. Where it's the architecture even changes because of the majority of immigrants that came there, right?
Yeah.
I do have a question that may be a stereotypical one and maybe not a comfortable one. And I don't even know how to pronounce the word properly, but I was told, because I come from a culture where working with the rules and being true and obedient to the system and accepting the laws and the rules as they are instead of trying to find my way around them, that this often collides with the work and lifestyle in South America. And in Brazil, they seem to have a word for it. I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Something like jeitinho or jeitinho.
Jeitinho.
So it's the working around the rules, right?
Yes.
Is that still a thing in Brazil, or is this something that has changed over the last 20, 30 years?
It's still a thing, and it's interesting, Christian. That's one thing that I always mention also during the training, because you have the positive jeitinho, which is like, it's not really going around a rule or something. It's finding a creative solution for a problem.
Right. Right.
And you have the jeitinho that people use, and I think it's mostly because of corruption that it started, which is like, the system is so complex, so complicated, that people find a way to just cut half the way and, find a jeitinho, another way, or someone who can do that and not follow the process. So, and just to give an example about jeitinho or the way it aligns with corruption, and that's one that's very common in Brazil. It's like you sign up for a passport, for example, and then you have X days for it to be ready. In the US, for example, if you want it faster, there is a legal fee that you can pay more, and then you have it faster. So it's clear, clear cut. You go in Brazil, and there's not this additional fee that you pay for it faster, but the person that's working sometimes right there is going to tell you, oh, do you really need it fast? That's okay. So you can, and they even create lanes for it, or terms. They can pay for coffee, pay for my coffee. Or it's like, if you pay for my coffee, or just pay for my coffee, and I can make it come next week, or, And people are like, oh my gosh, I'm going to pay for the coffee because I don't want to have the burden to come here. It's not ready. So then it perpetuates the system. So that's the jeitinho. So they go, they pay for the person, and the person goes like, perfect, it's going to be here tomorrow, So, and then what happens on the other side, the good jeitinho is basically like, okay, imagine I have my glasses, and then this thing broke, and then I go like, I don't have tape or anything, and I go like, okay, eu vou dar jeitinho. It's like, I'm going to give a jeitinho. I'm going to figure out a way to fix this without the tape. So I'm gonna
there's a word in American English. It's bootstrapping it, right? Or in India, in India they call the concept jugad, right? Where you make you make the best with the situation you have, and you find a creative solution.
Exactly, right. And that's the way we also use it. But then jeitinho, for people who are so used to a system that's kind of like you mentioned about Germany or Brazil, that you have the step 1, 2, 3, and you follow that. In Brazil, it's crazy. It has always been very hard for me to deal with that, because when someone would say like, oh, you pay for my coffee, I would say like, no, are you paying for mine? You're here to work. Like, and then they would say, oh, okay, so then you come here and next month you get your thing.
How about this, Jacqueline? I offer a compromise. When you come to Atlanta, you're happy to come to my house. I'll make you coffee.
Even better, see, and then you can come here and I'll make you coffee.
He makes a very good coffee. He makes a very good coffee. I will give you that.
It might be Italian coffee, so Cristina Arcaini will also come.
Italian coffee, that'd be good.
But, you should be okay with it.
Of course, he may just happen to accidentally have the ingredients for the caparina as well. So
you might have a bottle of cachaça sitting somewhere. You never know.
You're gonna be there somewhere.
Absolutely. Well, this is only just scratching the surface, obviously. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. We're very grateful that you agreed to come on and talk about Brazil. We should do more of these little country-specific things. Of course, Jacqueline not only speaks Portuguese, but Spanish as well. So if you're, just recently,
Muito bem, and I'm getting confused now.
Obrigado.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.